All right. So this is what your summary should include. Your summary should include the rationale for the constructed language. So basically, why was a constructed language created? Was it for a movie? Was it for a TV show? Was it for, the sake of having a constructed lingua franca? If you're looking at Esperanto, for example, the phonetic inventory of the constructed language. So again, just copy paste a phonetic inventory of the constructed language. You don't need to create it. It already exists. All you need to do is to cite where you got that information from, right? So if you took it from Wikipedia, tell me that this is from Wikipedia, or if it is from a book, tell me what book that is from. The vocabulary of the constructed language, give me some words of that language. By doing so, you're actually looking at how you can create these languages, create a constructed language of your own. The morphological complexity, so is it using compounding? Is it using agglutinating? Is it a fusional language? Those kind of morphological patterns that we looked at last week. The word order of the constructed language, is it subject, verb, object like English, or subject, object, verb like Japanese? Or maybe it is verb first like Arabic. What is the word order of the constructed language? And are there speakers of the constructed language, such as, are there books written in the language? Do you have societies or organizations that actually have, like a Klingon organization or Esperanto organization, etc.? And again, very similar to last assignment, this is 3 pages long, 1.5 spaced in Times New Roman font. And I've given you that, please, one of the things that came about, I've graded your first assignment. You will see the grade on Blackboard. One of my biggest comments is that, I know that you've taken information from sources. Tell me your sources, okay? Because if you don't tell me your sources, then it kind of falls into that gray area of plagiarism, because you didn't write it, somebody else wrote it. So you always have to cite information that you take from the web, or a book or any other resource. So always cite and tell me your sources. And like I said, if this is, I'm not testing your creativity here. I'm not testing your research skills here. I'm really getting your hands dirty with understanding how a constructed language works. That is the goal of this assignment, right? Because like I said, your final project is worth 40% of your grade. Like, that is what you should be concentrating on, okay? It's really important that you get started on your constructed language. Do not keep it for the last minute. We were almost already in March, right? I mean, from after spring break to end of the semester is just going to be there in a blink of an eye. So if you haven't started on your constructed languages, I would highly recommend that you do it sooner than later. Okay. Any questions on assignment 2? Okay, I will put that up on Blackboard, and that's due next Tuesday. Have you all started on your constructed languages? Have you all started on your final projects? Okay.
I'm having trouble deciding like what phonemes and stuff to include, because like I think some are cool, but I just don't know like how I would combine them or anything like that. Like clicks and stuff I think would be really, good, like particles or markers or something. But like other like phonemes that aren't like English or French or Spanish, I'm having trouble figuring out how I would, I guess, combine them together, if that makes sense. That's what I'm struggling with right now.
Yeah, and that's a perfectly normal struggle to have, especially when you start creating your own language. So that's why one of the things that, I will talk a little bit about next week, the world building process for your final project is really important. I would highly recommend that you start by creating your world, creating your characters, creating, having a visual representation of your world and your characters in your head, right? Because, so suppose you have a character that's an alien, and suppose the alien has, no teeth. right? Now, it's immediately obvious to you that you cannot have this alien produce sounds that need the teeth, right? So what are some of those sounds that you would use your teeth to produce? Look at your IP and you can see dental, labiodental.
Like the.
Yeah. So like the TH or the DH, right? The. Also P, P, P. You would need your top teeth to produce a P and a B, B, right? P, B. So now you immediately know that your phonemic inventory cannot include these sounds, right? So, you know, it highly helps that you can use the elimination process in some sense, right? So rather than seeing what sounds you can include, it might help to see what sounds do you need to exclude, right? Start with the exclusion process or the elimination process, because that, you know, that's a smaller subset of sounds to work with. So you can obviously see that, okay, if we eliminate all these sounds, then I definitely need sounds like, you know, or or something like that, right? With the clicks, I would recommend watching a couple of videos of people speaking Bantu languages, especially Zulu. Zulu is a classic example of a Bantu language, which has a ton of clicks. You know, get a feel for the language, see how the language sounds, and then obviously you can, you know, read up on Zulu or any other language with a click, try to see what that phonetic inventory looks like and how they kind of put words together. And that's really how I would start with incorporating sounds that you're not familiar with in English.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. There's like a journal on African linguistics or Black linguistics, so I've been going through that a little bit.
Yeah,
but that's why I'm just having trouble figuring out how to put certain sounds together, because like it said some have, you know, the clicks before consonants only at the beginning of the words, except for like a couple and just a few different things like that. And so that's why I'm like, I don't understand how to do it myself, especially when I don't make like, you know, syllables like that.
Yeah, I'm sure Landon has something really cool to say, but wait, hold on a second. I just want to follow up on what Nael said. I would actually not read journal articles because a lot of journal articles go into a lot more linguistic description than you would need at this point. I would actually recommend going to the library, going to the world languages section, taking a book on Zulu, right? It could be a dictionary, it could be an encyclopedia, it could be, you know, a basic book on the Zulu language, or a basic book on Greek or Latin or Japanese or something like that. Just go through the, you know, the book. The book will have all the sound systems, all the phonetic inventory, examples of words, and, you know, kind of morphological processes. Journals have a different purview because they ask a specific research question and they tackle linguistic data slightly differently from what you would need to build your own constructed language. So I would recommend not reading journal articles, not at this stage at least, right? And just sticking with basic books like dictionaries and other things. Landon?
I was just going to say, Niall, I noticed that you're not on the group me. You should join. We can spitball ideas and stuff. Of course, that goes for everyone else who's not in the group me as well.
Is everybody on the group me except me?
I think we got 10 members.
Okay.
In the group me. There's 11 people in the class right now, including you.
But it's 14 people in the class, and one person cannot join in person because he has a full-time job. So, you know, he's in touch with me. He watches the recordings and stuff, but I can pass on the message to him if you want. I think he would benefit from that. Or I can pass on his contact to you and you can add him. I don't know how group.
I know Trinity is in charge of the group me. So okay. I don't think I can add members myself.
Don't know if I have it open or not, but I can open it up too so that anyone who has anyone else's contact information in this class can add them as well.
Okay.
But yeah, if you want to pass on his contact information to me, I can get him added.
Okay, can you send me an email and then I can like forward the email to other people in the class, and then they can decide whether they want to join or not. So again,
Yeah, I can do that.
I don't know how GroupMe works. I know a lot of my students have GroupMe, but I haven't been a part of GroupMe, so it's just yet another texting. Is it a text based app? Okay, all right. So do you all know what group you belong to? Do you know whether you're part of fantasy or science fiction, or it doesn't matter for now? I mean, it's fine if it doesn't matter, but you can always create like a smaller subset with just the fantasy people and just the science fiction people. But everybody needs to create a phonetic inventory. Doesn't matter whether you're fantasy or science fiction, and everybody needs to do this world building process and decide on what sounds they want in their languages, etc. So yeah. How many of you have started on the project in some sense? Okay. I see a couple of hands. Okay. If you haven't, I highly recommend keeping a notebook just for this project. I mean, it could be a hard notebook, like a hard copy of a notebook, or it could just be a Word document or a Google Drive document or something like that. It really helps to get organized with your final project, just because when I see your final project in May, I know how much effort you put in. I'll be very honest with you. I've been teaching this class for 5 years. Okay, so I've seen 5 years worth of constructed languages coming from this class, and always the best constructed languages are the ones that have 3-4 months of effort put into it, right? And again, it doesn't mean that it's small progress, small steps, right? Every single week, just keep a deadline and say, okay, this week I am going to tackle the phonetic inventory, right? Or the consonant phonetic inventory. And the next week I'm going to tackle how do you create a word with the phonetic inventory that I've chosen, right? So it's really step by step the way I see it. And every week, if you dedicate like an hour, an hour and a half towards creating your language, by the end in May, you will have a language that you're really proud of. And, I think that's really important because it's 40% of your grade. And like I said, I can see effort versus, a haphazard job when I look at your language. So you really don't want to give me something that you have done within just 2 weeks. Okay, that's just not going to work. That's just not going to cut it. So any questions on that? Any questions on the world building process or just creating your language or anything of that sort? Yes, Kelly.
How specific are you wanting us to go in terms of like all the grammatical features?
Not too extensively. I just want you to kind of, when you give me the dictionary or the lexicon, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you just want to kind of point out and say, oh, this is a compound word, right? In a couple of instances, just so that I know that, okay, that's what you did right here, right? You took 2 different words. You can say, oh, I combined numbers 5 and 6 to create a compound word in 7.
Okay.
Those kind of grammatical features is what I'm really looking for. Your grade is really going to come from your phonetic inventory as well as your lexicon. That's what I grade you on.
Okay.
Anything else is just, it's good to see that creativity. I know a couple of you are creative writers in this class, and it's really helpful for you, especially if you're writing a book, to kind of have that language, already built before you write the book. But I really just want to see your creativity. That's what I'm interested in. Just go all out, guys. Be crazy. This is the one chance in your university where you're doing a final project where I've given you completely free reign, right? You can do whatever you want within those, the prompt structures that I've given you. But even if you want to blur the prompts, mix it all up, like mix the prompts up together, that's completely fine. I have had students in the past who have not stuck to a prompt, and that's completely okay. And yeah, Landon's like, oh, what can I do now without the prompt? But I for a lot of people, it really helps to have that structure. It really helps to have that prompt and, kind of say, oh, okay, this is what she wants us to do. But then I also get students who are like, I hate the prompt. Like, can I do something else? And I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, be my guest. I really, really give you all free reign and free will to do whatever you want with this project. Surprise me. Okay. That's really what I'm looking for. I mean, if your entire project is just a song, like, you want to give me a song with 200 words in it, be my guest. I mean, if you know how to sing, you can make a video and, be creative, really. I mean, that's if you want to convert this into a multimedia project, I'm more than happy to say yes to that. Okay. Yeah. See, Landon is now thinking, is like, okay, do something that you would put on your resume and be proud of, basically. Don't do it for the grade. Okay. This is on recording, so I shouldn't probably say this, but yes. And it's going up on YouTube. So, okay, let's get started. Did you all look at the video, not the video, the PDF of the slideshow that I posted on Blackboard? Okay, any questions on any of that material? I mean, we got started with constructed languages. And one of the things that I talked about, or the only concept really that I talked about in that video, is the arbitrariness of the sign, which I think, many of you are kind of familiar with, especially we've been talking about the arbitrariness of the sign from day one in this class. It really speaks to the concept of, the phonology of a word and the morphology or the semantic content of that word is completely arbitrarily linked, right? So a dog can be an ice cream in another language, phonetically and phonologically. And it doesn't really matter because, a group of people agreed that this is the meaning of this word. It's going to look like this and sound like this, right? And that's what we mean by arbitrariness of the sign. So, in that lecture slide, I actually gave you an example of how you can actually create your own words in your constructed language, how we do it in natural language and how we can do it in constructed language, right? And how, there's just so many different permutation and combinations for X amount of sounds, right? So if you have 3 sounds, then you have 3 raised to 3 variations, right? To bring in a little bit of math. I don't want to bring in too much math in 151 because, I talk a lot more about all the mathematical aspects of linguistics in 315, but linguistics is highly connected to math, if you want my take on it. It's fundamental, right? In that sense. So any questions on that lecture slide before I move on? All right, so let's get started. I have a new class that I'm teaching in fall of 2022. Sometimes I teach this as a 100 level class, like 152 actually, but next semester I'm actually teaching this as a 500 level class because some graduate students in my department want to take it as well. So I'm teaching this. It's called the language of food, but it's not listed as the language of food. If you look at registration, when registration opens up, but it's going to be listed as Linguistics 590 special topics in linguistics. But the special topic in linguistics for next semester is the language of food. What am I going to do in this class? Well, we are going to be eating food. Well, it's going to be a hybrid class, but we are going to be talking a lot about food and hopefully eating some food. But really, it looks into, the words behind menus and how there are hidden structures, right? Linguistic structures behind all these food terminology, right? Like if you take a label, I have a Gatorade sitting here. So, all these kind of food labels, we're going to analyze all these food labels and see, all the kind of taglines that they have. So Gatorade is basically rehydrate, replenish, and refuel, right? So we're going to look at what does it mean, right? And it says artificially flavored. And, what does it mean when I say this restaurant is authentic? We serve authentic Chinese cuisine. What does it mean, right? So that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be using computational linguistic tools. So we're going to be using like n-grams and other corpus linguistic data, etc. It's going to be a fun class. I've taught it before at the 100 level, but I've never taught it at the 500 level. But it's going to be fun. So I just wanted to put that into your radar. If you could let other people know that there's this class. All right. So the last class or the last lecture slide that you looked at, I introduced two different kinds of constructed languages: philosophical languages, which was probably one of the first iterations of constructed language, as well as international auxiliary languages, such as Volapük was one of the languages that we looked at. We're going to continue in the tradition of, older to newer constructed languages. And I love Lord of the Rings. I don't know about you guys, but I'm really excited about the new series that's coming out later this year. I thought it was coming out in summer, and I'm like, no, it's in September, it's in fall, right? But they've already put out the trailer and stuff. So I cannot wait. But this is J.R.R. Tolkien, and he is the author of Lord of the Rings. And he actually had, he knew linguistics. He dabbled in linguistics. He studied historical linguistics. So, like I said, he knew what he was doing when he was creating all these languages. It was science-based, right? Evidence-based language formation. So let's actually look at Elvish. There are a ton of different languages in Lord of the Rings, but the language that I'm going to be focusing on is Elvish. So let's actually hear what Elvish looks like. Okay. So this is Tamati Kohi, and this is the premiere of The Hobbit, I believe. And he is actually going to read weather in Elvish. Okay, so let's listen.
World, the weather forecast in Elvish, Tamati. Hellan vain ennor, si abgen edregol, ani lair ovol. It will be drier than normal in the North Island and the top of the South Island. The winds will come mainly from the southwest. Linaurui urui, the orbeli feriain. Ameni lui, iastair athirari dran. Middle Earth weather can be changeable, but it settles in summer and becomes warmer. It's a moderate climate, but top temperatures can reach 30 degrees. There's some rain in the south and it's cooler, but overall, the weather is looking spectacular for most of summer. It will be the perfect time to cycle along the Queenstown trails. Thiar bain indur, ahastvaira randirath, ugirithron naninui, natha ovras ahared, ahahened, no alwed ilairli.
Book your perfect place to stay. Booking.com.
Sorry about that. How was that? Have you all heard Elvish before? I'm assuming yes. Yeah. Landon, do you have something to say?
I just thought it was very funny.
Yeah, it's funny because, I mean, where did I go? So he used New Zealand, right, to kind of explain that, okay, this is Hobbit Town and this is, another the Shire and, all those kind of different places that you would find a lot of the Rings. And I believe that it was actually shot in New Zealand, right? A lot of the movie was shot in New Zealand. So, but he dressed like an elf, right? So elves have, as you can see here, they have long hair, and their hair is always like, silver in color, I want to say, right? But they are really, they carry themselves very, they have an aura about them, right? And there are different kinds of Elvish languages. So I have two different Elvish languages here. So one is Kenya and the other is Sindarin. And the difference between Kenya and Sindarin, does anybody know the difference between these two dialects or languages, if you will? Well, Kenya is called the High Elvish. So it's basically spoken, it's kind of like, to use a Bible analogy, it's kind of like the first version in which Bible was written, like Aramaic, right? Or something like that. It's like High Elvish, right? Kenya. It's not spoken, it's mostly spoken by, as you can see, the high women, very often the women who would forecast the future or predict what's going to happen, and that kind of thing. And then Sindarin is what's the normal local dialect of Elvish. So Sindarin dialect is what you would hear in the movies, and what you would see, kind of written. So the script of the Elves is called as the Tengwar script, and it looks like that. And so you have English, which is a Latin script, right? So in English, you have the word for stone, and in Tengwar, you would write it like this, right? And then Elvish, in the Sindarin dialect of Elvish, you would pronounce this as Gond, and you would write it like this. So as you can see, the script itself is so different between, the Sindarin script and the Kenya script of Elvish. So it's not just the words that are different, but also the way that you write the script is different. I often get a question asked about the final project, whether you need to create your own script. And my answer is no, you don't need to create your own script. But if you want to do that, that's perfectly fine. You don't have to write your entire 200 words into your script, but you can obviously give me an example of your script and, kind of maybe write some words in your script. I've had students do that in the past, but that is by no means a requirement. Okay, you don't need to, you're not required to create your own script, but feel free to do it if you feel, that's going to help you. The other interesting thing about the Tengwar script is that you also have different modes of the Tengwar script. So it's called the common mode, the Sindarin mode, or the Kenya mode. And then depending on the geographical location in which that particular Elvish is spoken, the script actually changes, and the words actually change. So I've given you the common mode for English for the translation of The Lord of the Rings, and the Sindarin mode of Gondor. So Gondor is a place, as you know, from in Lord of the Rings, and the Sindarin mode of Beleriand, and the Kenya mode, right? And what can you tell me? What can you tell me between the Sindarin modes and the Kenya mode? What's the main difference that stands out to you?
The length of the Kenya mode, it's a lot shorter. And you said that's the high Elvish speak?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the length definitely seems to be shorter than the Sindarin mode. But really, the one thing that stands out to me is all the diacritics at the bottom, right? In the Kenya mode, you don't see any diacritics in the Sindarin mode at all, right? You don't see it here, and you didn't see it in the previous slide as well, right? So that really seems to be one of the kind of distinguishing factors between the Kenya mode and the Sindarin mode. But again, there are different ways of writing Sindarin and Kenya depending on geographical location. So this would be very similar to different dialects of English, except that when we talk about dialects of English, we often talk only about the spoken variety, right? And very often you don't see differences in the written form. I mean, the only difference that I can think of between different dialects of English with respect to the written form is British English versus American English, when you have differences in spelling, like COLOUR for color in American English and COLOR for color in British English. But nothing in this kind of form for any language that I know of in the written variety. So that's, I think, one of the distinguishing factors for Elvish, that they really do distinguish the written form as well as the spoken form. So Elvish language is quite complicated because there are different, I don't want to use the word tribes, but I don't think they use the word tribes, but like different sections of elves in the book, as well as in the movie. So you have primitive Elvish, which has two different branches, Eldarin and tongues of the Avery. Eldarin is from which most other widely spoken variations of Elvish is derived. So that's really the more productive language family branch. And the tongues of the Avari is spoken by those who rejected the summons of the Valar. So they're basically the elves who moved away from, the main kind of faction of elves. And then Eldarin has two different kind of subsections. Kenya, which is the ancient Elvish language preserved by the High Elves in Aman, and Telerin, which is the language of the third clan of the Elves. And it's from Telerin that you actually get Sindarin and Nandorin. Sindarin is basically the gray elves of Sindar. So that's why we see a lot of Sindarin in the book and in the movies, because you always see the gray elves, right? Or the silver, right? Elves. And Nandorin is the group of Teleri who abandoned the great journey east of the Misty Mountains. And then they both kind of merge to give you the Sylvan dialects. This is spoken by the Sylvan Elves, which is a branch of Nandor, and the language grew out of Nandorin and Sindarin. So as you can see, really intricate. There's a lot of research that's been done on Elvish in linguistics. It's highly fascinating if you're interested in that, especially if you want to tie historical linguistics with morphology and phonology and syntax. Again, a really cool capstone project for applied linguistics majors if you're interested in that. Okay, so I have given you the Sindarin alphabet, and I want you to write your name in Elvish. You can try to write your full name, or if you just want to write your first name, you can just write your first name. I'm going to find a pen and paper and do my name as well.
I have a quick question. What do the arrows mean? Like next to I,
It
the
means
up
you have to
arrow?
put that on top, like the in the other slide that I showed you, like on top. Yeah,
And it goes on top of the previous consonant?
I think so. Yeah.
Depends on your mode.
Yes, it depends on your mode too. Yes. Yeah, true. That's Landon. And I'm assuming the last one is Schmidt, and then the middle one is your middle name, right? Let me see if I can find your middle name. Wait, what's the second one? Gwen? Again? No. Wait. I'm getting the first letter wrong, I think. Oh, James. No. Is it J? It's J, right? The first one.
John.
John. Yeah. Okay, that was easy because that's a common middle name. Cool. Kelly Adams.
Well, actually, my last name is not Adams, it's Rawlings.
Oh.
I just haven't changed it in any system yet.
Okay. I haven't changed. I still have my maiden last name. So yeah. Anybody else?
I have lots of vowels in my name, so I don't quite know how to stack up vowels.
Me too, which is why I think that this is my that, you know.
I can help with this. There is a way to, there's a vowel carrier, which is just a straight stick line.
Okay.
If you need to put a vowel at the beginning of the word, if you're using them, if you're putting them on the previous, or at the end of a word, if you're putting them on the next.
Yeah, you know, Malayalam behaves the same way actually. So, you know, our vowels are always stacked on to the previous consonant or the, you know, the following consonant. So this is actually a lot similar to that, except that obviously we don't put diacritics on top, but, you know, yeah. Anybody else who wants to share your name? Oh, Trinity, sorry. Yeah, that looks actually cool, Trinity, because your last name is longer, right? And yeah, that's actually pretty cool. Cool. Okay. Let's move on to Klingon. So now we're getting into, you know, the 1980s. We're getting closer to like less historical constructed languages, I want to say, and more modern constructed languages. I think it's around, you know, the time that Klingon came, 1980s, that constructed languages became more modern, right, than their historical counterparts. So Klingon is a language that was commissioned for a movie series, the Star Trek movie series, and it's a series that began in 1984. And, you know, here's a shot of a person from the movie. And so I want to show you this video. Okay. Okay.
With MailChimp, you can design more engaging marketing assets in no time at all, thanks to our AI-powered creative assistant.
Hi, my name is Marco Cran. What I do most of the time is I oversee the creation of closed caption television programs for both local stations and networks and cable and so forth. But I also created the Vulcan and Klingon dialogue heard in Star Trek 2, 3, 4, and 5, and so forth. The whole connection with linguistics in Star Trek for me actually started not with Star Trek 3, but with Star Trek 2. There's a short scene in Star Trek 2 where Spock and Saavik talk to each other on the Enterprise. And as originally shot, the two actors are speaking in English, but they wanted to change it so that they're speaking Vulcan to each other, and they just put in subtitles. But rather than reshooting the whole thing, what they decided to do was just dub in dialogue that would sound very different from English, but match the lip movements that were already there. So they figured they would hire a linguist, someone who was good at phonetics, the speech sounds, who would know what sounds look alike and what sounds look different and make the lips match. And I told him I thought that was a great idea. So I made up these 4 lines of Vulcan. And after I did that, I got in my car and was driving away. I was thinking, oh, I just taught Mr. Spock how to speak Vulcan. I thought, that's it, I can die now, everything is okay. And I thought that would be the end of my connection with Star Trek, because I wasn't counting on it in the first place. About a year and a half later, I got a call from Harv Bennett, who said, we're making a new movie, Star Trek 3. The bad guys, the villains, are going to be the Klingons. He says, I think it would be a good idea for the Klingons to have their own language. Would you like to do that? You did the Vulcan, would you like to do the Klingon? And every once in a while, you're presented with a decision in life that's not very difficult to make. And that was one of them, so I said, yes. And so that's how I made up the Klingon. But the Klingon and the Vulcan was a very, very different experience, because the Vulcan, as I say, was matching sounds to lip movements already on the film, whereas Klingon, we started from scratch. When it came time to make up the language, I had to make a couple of decisions. I had to decide what it's going to sound like. I had to decide what the grammar was going to be like. I had to make up a lot of words for the language. For the words, actually, that was the easy part, because I only had to make up the dialogue that was in the film. The original intent was not to make up a full language that you could talk about anything in and carry on great philosophical discussions. The original intent was to make up lines of dialogue for Star Trek 3. So if the word was in the film, in the script for the film, I would make up a word. And if the word wasn't in the script for the film, I probably did make up the word. But to start with the sounds, because I had to figure out what it's going to sound like, there was a couple of influences. The most important one was Star Trek: The Motion Picture. We've never heard Klingon before. In the original series, they didn't speak Klingon.
We like the Enterprise. We really do. That sagging old rust bucket is designed like a garbage scow. Half the quadrant knows it. That's why they're learning to speak Klingonese.
But we then hear no examples of Klingonese. We don't know what it sounds like. So the only Klingon we have from the original series is people's names. There's Kang and Kor and Koloth and a woman named Mara. That's it. But those are real Klingon words, because those are their names. So that has to be incorporated into the language. But in Star Trek: The Motion Picture, at the beginning, there's real Klingon. There's real sentences with real subtitles. So that has to be incorporated into the language too. Now, I came to Star Trek after that, because I started with Star Trek 2. But the Klingon for Star Trek: The Motion Picture, I found out afterwards, I didn't know this when I was first starting my work, was actually made up by James Doohan, the actor who plays Scotty. And it was spoken by Mark Leonard, who's the actor who normally plays Sarek, Spock's father. But in this film, he was playing the captain and commander of the Klingon ship. So he was the first speaker of Klingon. So I did the best I could and listened to the lines over and over and over again and wrote them down. And those are real Klingon sentences. Those are words. Those are the translations, what they mean. Those are the sounds. If it was a 3-syllable Klingon sentence, I kind of imposed a structure on it. I had to decide, okay, it's 3 syllables. Is that 1 word or 2 words or 3 words? I would just decide that's 2 words. The first 2 syllables are 1 word, and the third one is another word, or the other way around, or just because I had to start someplace. But I also made an inventory of the sounds that were used in there, because all of those sounds in the motion picture also had to be in the language that I was coming up with, because it's the same language. So for example, one of the phrases in Star Trek: The Motion Picture is "we cha." So there's those sounds. I started making a list, an inventory of what the sounds are. So "we cha," there's a w. I'm putting them in different parts of the chart here. There's a e. There's a ch, and the way linguists write, that's a number of ways linguists write that, but one of them is C with a little thing on it, that's a ch. There's a ah. Okay, so we cha. I'm writing them all over the place here because I'm going to end up filling out a full chart. Those 4 sounds have to be sounds in the Klingon that I'm coming up with, because they were in the original film. So I charted out all the sounds from the original film, and there was some, but not enough. I had to add more to make Klingon be a real language. Otherwise, all the words would sound alike, because there'd be so few sounds. So in adding the sounds, I paid attention to a couple of things. One was that according to the script for Star Trek 3, Klingon is a guttural language. It says in the script that Krug, who's the main Klingon villain in the film, says in his guttural Klingon, and then there's the line. Well, if Krug is supposed to speak in guttural Klingon, I better add some guttural sounds. So I added a sound and a sound, which is different, and so on. I also intentionally violated some rules of human languages. And what I mean by that is this: human languages are very patterned. There's no 100% rules, but there's a lot of tendencies, and more likely than nots, and so forth. And certain sounds tend to be together in a language, and certain sounds tend not to be in the same language. So since Klingon is not a human language, it didn't have to follow those human language rules. So I could put sounds together in Klingon that normally would not be in the same language. So, for example, in Klingon, there's the sound V. Okay, and usually in a language, if there's a V sound, there's also an F sound. Not in Klingon. Why? Because usually that's the way it works in human languages, and Klingon is not a human language. In Klingon, there's a T sound, and there's also a D in Klingon, but the D doesn't match the T. You make it with putting your tongue in a different place. That's unusual from a human language point of view. Therefore, that's a good thing to do in Klingon, and so on. There's a number of things like that. We're just violating the rules of human phonetics or the
So that point I want, that point that he made, I think is so relevant for your final project, because you are not creating a human language, right? It's so easy for us as human beings to stick to patterns that we know and stick to things that we are not supposed to do. So for you, as an English speaker, you might be like, okay, you can do spot, S-P, right? A consonant cluster, S-P. You can do S-P-K, right? Like skirt. You can do a different permutation and combinations of S-P-R, right, etc. But you cannot do something like S-P and P, right, SPP, because English does not allow you to do that. But that doesn't mean that your constructed language cannot do it, right? Your constructed language for sure can do something like that, because it's completely okay for your constructed language to disobey anything and everything human languages do. I think that's a really important point for you to keep in mind, which is why I always tell you, be creative is basically go out of your comfort zone and do stuff that, you might not have heard other human languages do it.
Tendencies of human phonetics. I came up with the inventory of sounds for Klingon. There's no sound in Klingon that doesn't occur somewhere in some human language, somewhere or other, but the collection of sounds is unique to Klingon. And it's weird from a human language point of view. Well, in addition to the sounds, I had to worry about the grammar of the language. You can't just throw words together in somewhere or other. A language is more than just its dictionary, right? If I gave you a dictionary of French and said, okay, go ahead and speak French, you wouldn't know what to do. And it's the same thing with Klingon. So it's not just a list of words. So I had to figure out what the grammar was going to be. But what does that mean? That means the basic word order, are there going to be prefixes and suffixes, are there going to be tenses and plurals, all that kind of thing. And I honestly, at this point, don't remember what I did first or how I decided what when. But I do remember some of the thinking that went into what I chose to do. So for example, the basic order of the words I had to figure out. Sort of the three basic elements in a sentence are the subject, the verb, and the object. The subject is who's doing the action. The verb is what is the action. And the object is who's receiving the action, assuming that that's appropriate to the sentence. It doesn't have to be there. So in English, this is the order. The subject and then the verb and then the object. Dogs bite people. Dogs are the things doing the action. Bite is the action. People are the recipients of the action. In English, if you take those same words and put them in reverse order, people bite dogs, it means something totally different, even though the words are exactly the same. So part of the grammar of English is knowing where in the sentence does the subject fall and where does the object fall. Otherwise, you don't know who's doing what to whom most of the time. It's a little more complicated than that. Anyway, if you look around at all the different languages, there's all kinds of different orders these things can fall in. It doesn't have to be the way English is. And in fact, in some languages, it could be any old thing because you mark who's doing it by little suffixes or something like that. But ignoring that for the time being, mathematically, for these three elements, there's 6 possible combinations. In other words, there's the subject, verb, object. It could be subject, object, verb. It could be verb, object, subject, verb, subject, object, object, subject, verb, object, verb, subject. But mathematically, there's 6 of these things. And all of these things are represented in languages in the world somewhere or other. However, some of them are a lot more common than others. So if you take this weird notion that the most common are the most human and the least common are the least human, then for Klingon, I should pick the least common, not because of any other reason than it's found in the fewest human languages. And the least common are these, the ones with the object first. And this one here is the one I chose for Klingon that's found in a few languages in the world, not very many, as the basic word order. But because it's so uncommon in the world, that made it a good candidate for the basic word order for Klingon, which is not of this world. I had to decide what to do about the pronouns and had to decide whether it's just going to be independent words like in English, I, you, he, she, or there's going to be suffixes or prefixes or something like in some other languages, or both. And I decided on both. So there are independent pronouns in Klingon that mean I, you, and so forth. But also with every verb, there's a little prefix that tells you who the object is, who the subject is. And what I did is modeled after some languages actually from the Himalayas and put those notions together. So a single prefix could mean the subject by itself, or it could mean the subject and the object together. So, for example, I do something to you. I'm sorry, I do something to him, I do something to her. The little prefix is vit, and then the verb comes after that. Now that's different from this because it's not an independent word. So the subject's, the prefix part is independent of the independent words, if that makes any sense. I do something to you is ka. If I write that like QA, because I do something to you. Neither of this means I or you all by itself. Together it means I do something to you. So all the prefixes work like that. If he does something to her or she does something to him, then there's no prefix at all. So the absence of a prefix is meaningful as well.
Okay. You can watch the rest of the video at home. It's a pretty lengthy video, but I hope that you got some take-home points from the video, especially, going back to Niall's point about how do you incorporate certain sounds that you are not maybe familiar with to begin with, but it's completely okay to do because you are not creating a human language. And that's really, I think, the first, step to kind of keep in mind as you go through the creation of your own constructed language. The link, I can put the link in the chat box if you want to watch the rest of the video. I highly recommend watching Mark Okran. His name is Mark Okran. He's a creator of Klingon. Any thoughts on the video? Was it useful? Yeah, a little bit, maybe.
In terms of answering my question, it was definitely very, very useful.
Good. Okay, yeah. Then that's the goal of this week and next week as well, to kind of get you really started on thinking about your own constructed languages and give you these kind of tools and resources. So I highly recommend watching through the video. And any other video that he's created on where he talks about how he created the language and that kind of stuff. So now, as Mark said, Klingon was not supposed to be this really famous, hugely popular constructed language, but it did. People really loved Klingon, so much so that dictionaries have been written on Klingon and books have been translated into Klingon. So here is a Klingon version of Shakespeare's Hamlet. And there are actually active learners of the language. So you can actually learn Klingon just like how you would learn Spanish and, Japanese and all that kind of stuff. So Klingon is a really, really famous constructed language, if not the most famous constructed language. But like I said, Klingon really started the trend of what I call the modern constructed languages. So here is another example of a more modern constructed language. This is Navi language from Avatar. This is 2009. And this was actually made by a professor at University of Southern California, where I did my PhD, Dr. Paul Frommer. He's actually a linguist, but he's also a journalist. He's in the journalism school at USC. But he, I mean, if you live in Los Angeles, sometimes you might receive a call and say, hey, do you want to come down to like, Warner Brothers studio and like create a language? That's really common in Los Angeles, just because there are so many studios and, so many people working on constructed language. So this is how the Navi language looks like. Here is a script of the Navi language and some of the sounds of Navi. Have you watched Avatar before? Some of you, yeah? Okay. I really like the movie. If you're into watching, science fiction and fantasy kind of movie, this is in the fantasy genre. So I highly recommend watching the movie. If you haven't watched the movie yet, again, it'll give you a perspective on how to create your own language. So that's, I think, really cool. I'm not gonna go over this in the interest of time, but I will definitely put this link in the chat box so that you can watch it again at home. There, so that's Navi. And the most recent, I think I want to say, constructed language that has become really popular is Dothraki. And how many of you are Game of Thrones fans? No?
I love it.
Okay, wait, who's that? Is that Kelly? I can see you guys. Okay, Kelly, yes. Okay. Yeah, so Dothraki, which is, probably 10 years in the making. So this is from Game of Thrones. Dothraki is, I think, right now, one of the most famous kind of languages. So let's actually listen to some Dothraki.
Upended your entire comfortable life to become a pirate. Hi all! Pirating is not for everyone. We're going to go on up there and cause some havoc. How violent. You're a bit of a cross between the Mongols and some of the Native American tribes. There are horse people. They live in these great, vast grass plains, and they make a living by conquering other people. For them, warfare is everything. Book George had created a few words for them, but it wasn't fully fleshed out. And for the series, we actually thought it would be much more believable if we heard them speaking their own language rather than have them speak in heavily accented English. We really felt the only way it would work is if there was a real language. We went to the Language Creation Society, who turned us on to David Peterson, and he created a language taking into account what we told him and what was in the books.
As a language creator, you must start with the culture. You have to start with the people. You piece together life is, and little by little you build up vocabulary that kind of reflects their worldview and their world. What might their values be like? What do they see the world as? What's important? What's not important?
Sejora, I don't know how to say thank you in Dothraki.
There is no word for thank you in Dothraki.
From there, it was fleshing out the rest of the grammar bit by bit, adding more words. I created a lot of vocabulary well before I translated any of the scripts for the first season. This is where I have my word count here. I was near 2,000 words at that time.
We would write the scripts and we would send the scenes to David and say these lines will be in Dothraki. David would send us back translations.
I would give the writing team a translation that had the Dothraki line, the English line. Then I had a phonetic transcription. And then, of course, I recorded everything on MP3, every single line, there must have been hundreds, so that they could get the intonation right, the phrasing,
I think I say like 2 lines in English, but yeah, everything else is Dothraki.
Khal Drogo in the book delivers a long monologue in the common tongue, which is essentially English. In the series, Khal Drogo, as played by Jason Momoa, delivers this monologue in Dothraki, and it's this great, powerful speech. It sounds fantastic. Dothraki changed the sound of the show. It's a very guttural kind of language. It's not an easy one to pronounce.
It's incredible language, getting your mouth around the word, like they're so expressive. At-jaka. At-jahakar. At-jahaka.
Just like the sounds of it. There's like really good rhythms to it. It's basically like Arabic and German.
You want to make it sound as natural as you can, and so you have to be very careful with these strong characters not to speak strongly as well all the time.
When it goes into the actors' mouths, we've talked about little compromises that make it easier to flow in the scenes.
What's he saying?
He says yes.
Brendan Gunn, the on-set dialect coach, was kind of my ears and eyes on the set. He would let me know what the actors were having trouble with, what things were working, how things were going.
There are a lot of forgetting bits. There are a lot of bits, so they kind of just they float out your head.
The actors are learning phonetically by listening to CDs and MP3s.
Just try to memorize it and try to memorize it. And once you recite it all the time, then you got to figure out what you're saying in English.
Then they are reading the English and trying to map the emotion of the English onto the Dothraki.
You learn the lines in English. You know, you want to know how you want to play the scene. Once you know that, then you learn the lines phonetically. And then you translate them into the moods and sounds and the intentions that you've made on the English.
As a Maigi, easy chat. Put the subtext underneath. So really your lines, your English lines are underneath as well. So then you manage to sort of put that over the top. It's kind of an interesting process to learn something that's not necessarily what you're saying.
Drogo asks if you want him dead, Khaleesi. No!
It comes from a real place rather than somebody speaking gobbledygook and expecting you to learn it.
Sounds right, you know, and if you do gabba, it always sounds really crap. So it is worth trying to master it.
Had to be real, I think, for a show that has the demands for authenticity that this one does. I really had free reign to just expand the language, explore the culture, and to fill in the blanks as I saw fit, based on both my understanding what was going on in the series and everything I'd read from the books.
Vos adore me. My throne.
There is no word for throne in Dothraki.
Throne.
Adore finan Khal.
Just by watching the show, people are going to be able to take and use the language. It's going to be right there.
Someone will translate Hamlet into Dothraki.
It's just a lovely other way of kind of expressing yourself, really.
Villageros, y voy.
So for those of you who haven't
For
watched,
just $67, you can make as many videos as you want, and you'll never.
For those of you who haven't watched Game of Thrones, how did that sound like? I mean, was this like the first time that you heard Dothraki, or what did Dothraki sound like to you? Did it sound like any language you're familiar with, or your thoughts on that?
Any language that has that uvular Q, pa 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 sound is going to have that guttural sound that English speakers identify as guttural.
Yeah.
Klingon
yes.
has it, Dothraki has it, Arabic has it.
Yes, yes, yes. So, you know,
If you want a language to sound guttural, that's the one you do.
At least to a
Throw
very
it in.
important point, I think, Landon, that, you know, do you associate guttural sounds with people being more rough in some sense? Like, you know, do people who speak guttural sounds, are they like rough and tough, right? Like Khal Drogo, and, you know, is there an association? Is that an inherent association in your brain that, you know?
There is an association in our culture, I think, with, and I think it's partially rooted in some definitely racist things, like basically things that sound like Arabic or have Arabic sounds are going to be seen poorly, but it doesn't have to be that way. I've sort of unlearned that by using a bunch of sounds all the time in all my languages.
Right.
But you can make a language that sounds just as fluid and beautiful. It's all about your intonation.
That's a very important point, I think. I mean, you can change the intonation even if you sound guttural, right? And then still sound sweet in some sense. Right?
Unless you're speaking Klingon. You can't do that in Klingon.
Yeah.
Klingon will sound ugly no matter how you're saying.
Well, and I think that some of that, like the racism aspect that Landon was talking about, that I think that also comes from like the tribal languages, the native languages in America.
Yeah.
You know, Native Americans originally were seen as barbarians.
Right.
You know.
Right. That lack of civilization, or the civilized nature that European conquerors were so kind of adamant about, right? Yeah. I get that. So we're almost close to time, so I want to talk about two things I think that came out of that video that we just watched in Dothraki. One is possible career opportunities. If you're doing an applied linguistics major, you can be a dialect manager on a studio set in Hollywood, right? Like that guy who was walking around and like showing them the script and saying, no, this is not how you say that. This is how you would say this, right? Like correct your pronunciation and, be a dialect coach or a language coach or something like that. I think that's a really cool career opportunity. I was talking to the dean about this a couple of years back, but then COVID happened. And I said, I really want to take my Linguistics 151 student, team to Hollywood to kind of get a, hands-on experience of how you would create a language and, visit a studio and kind of get the feel for, maybe their language could be the next Klingon or the next Dothraki, right? It may happen, I mean, you never know. There aren't a lot of universities that actually teach creating your own language. So I think we are one of the few that actually does this. So I'm really proud of that aspect for sure. So that's a, great career opportunity. If you're interested in movies and theater and languages, being a language dialect coach in like a Hollywood studio. The other thing was, there's a lot of readings that I put up on Blackboard, which I hope you're reading, because David Peterson's book, I have a couple of different chapters from David Peterson's book up on Blackboard. David Peterson, as you saw, is the creator of Dothraki, but he's also the creator of a lot of different modern constructed languages. We will look at a couple of others on Thursday, but I highly recommend that you read the book and read chapters of the book. If you can get hold of the book, by all means do that. I think the library has a copy, so you can even borrow it from the library. But it's not all that expensive, if I know. So if you're interested in constructed languages, and if you're interested in like a popular book on constructed languages, I highly recommend David Peterson's book. Landon?
I just wanted to share that there are, as far as I know, only 2 creators on YouTube who are making a language on YouTube, like live.
Okay.
And Langtime Studio is one, Langtime Studio, and David Peterson is on that.
Wait, can you?
I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, if you can put it in the chat, that would be good. Yes.
Langtime Studio, and he's creating a bunch of languages for a board game, and each language is a season. They're on season 3 right now, and the first language was for rabbits, the second one was for possums, this third one is for mice, and so they're all little animal people. That's Langtime Studio, and so that one's pretty. They're all very rambly, very not organized things. Okay. The other guy is Biblaridian. I'm trying to remember how to spell it. Biblaridian. And he has a series on how to make a language.
Okay.
And he does more than making languages. He also makes aliens and stuff. But he's got like, if you're interested in like how Arabic works, he's got a video on that. He's got some cool stuff too.
Cool. Thank you so much for those resources. And, Landon is a great resource as well because he has many constructed languages of your own. Would you like to share one of your constructed languages in class one day?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
If you want to do it for next Tuesday, so that I can give you like about a week to prepare a slideshow or something like that,
Sure.
You could take 10 minutes to you can discuss all your languages or maybe just stick to one. I will leave that decision up to you. But yeah, next Tuesday, London.
Yeah, I can do that.
Perfect. Kelly?
Just real quickly, you had mentioned wanting to take your applied linguistics students to Hollywood. Have you ever considered partnering with Shocker Studios?
Yeah, I mean, in what way are you talking about? Like, as in going
Well,
to Shocker Studios?
I know that at Shocker Studios, a lot of the students, they're making short films and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It might be fun to have a project tied with them, maybe.
That would be cool. Yeah, let me think a little bit more about that. My idea was to just have like a study abroad, but not a study abroad really, but like a study in Los Angeles, kind of, something like that.
LA would definitely be better.
If we can go to LA, we will work with Shocker Studios, So yeah, thanks for the suggestion. I will think a little bit about that.
Okay.
We're out of time. So thank you all so much and have fun with your languages. I will see you on Thursday. Bye.
I have a question just for you. For your office hours, do you do those over Zoom as well?
Yes, and it's right now at 11 o'clock. But if you just want to stick on here and talk, we can do that as well.
Okay, yeah, that might be easier since we're already here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well,